Ma'am, step out of the car now!
Officer, this is my car. This is my home. Please check my ID before proceeding.
I said step out! You're being detained for vehicle theft and resisting arrest!
I am Judge Patricia Williams, a federal judge. Please verify.
The dashboard camera captured everything every second of what would soon become the most expensive traffic stop in American history. It was 2:15 in the afternoon on a quiet Tuesday when Judge Patricia Williams pulled into her own driveway. After a long, tiring day at federal court, she had just finished working on a difficult civil rights case, ironically enough, and all she wanted now was to go inside, relax, and enjoy a peaceful evening with her family. Judge Patricia Williams was far from an ordinary woman. At 52 years old, she had spent her entire adult life chasing justice and fairness. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood where her parents taught her the value of hard work, education, and standing up for what is right. After graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Law School, she dedicated 15 years to working as a prosecutor. She then spent another 10 years in private practice before eventually being appointed to the federal bench by the president himself. Within the legal community, she was widely respected for being fair, sharp-minded, and deeply loyal to the Constitution. Colleagues often described her as someone who gave every case her full attention, whether it involved a powerful corporation or a single citizen fighting for their rights. Over the years, she had handled hundreds of cases, many of which focused on police misconduct and racial discrimination. That Tuesday afternoon, Judge Williams was driving her black Mercedes sedan through her quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood. She had purchased the car just 6 months earlier as a personal reward after receiving a Distinguished Service Award from the State Bar Association. The streets were calm, lined with tall trees, and clearly part of a wealthy area. She felt proud knowing she had worked her entire life to afford a home there, and to give her family opportunities previous generations never had. As she turned into her driveway, she noticed a police cruiser following behind her. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police cars were common in the area, and she had always seen them as symbols of safety. She reached over to grab her briefcase from the passenger seat and was just about to step out of the car when she suddenly heard the loud slam of a car door behind her. Officer William Thompson had been a member of the police department for 8 years. Later, his personnel file would reveal a troubling history of complaints, many involving interactions with black drivers. But on that Tuesday afternoon, he was about to make a decision that would permanently change both his life and Judge Williams' life. He walked toward her car with one hand resting near his service weapon, his face tight and suspicious. Judge Williams rolled down her window as he approached. She expected a calm greeting or maybe a routine question about neighborhood safety. Instead, he sharply demanded her license and registration in a tone that immediately made her uneasy. Remaining calm and respectful, she asked why she was being stopped and explained that she had simply pulled into her own driveway. Officer Thompson's response would later be described by legal experts as a clear and textbook example of racial profiling. He claimed her car matched the description of a vehicle that had recently been reported stolen in the area. When Judge Williams calmly explained that the car belonged to her and gestured toward the house just steps away, his behavior quickly shifted. His voice grew harsher, and he ordered her to step out of the vehicle right away, accusing her of trying to avoid his questions. This was the moment when Judge Williams made a choice that would later become extremely important. Instead of arguing or reacting with emotion, she stayed calm and cooperated. Years of courtroom experience had taught her how vital it was to remain composed, even in unfair and stressful situations. She knew her behavior in this moment could determine whether things stayed under control or spiraled into something much worse. She slowly stepped out of the car, keeping her hands visible at all times. In a steady, clear voice, she repeated that both the vehicle and the house belonged to her. She then politely asked Officer Thompson to run the license plate to confirm whether it matched the stolen vehicle report he mentioned. This reasonable request only seemed to make him angrier. Without answering her question, he ordered her to place her hands behind her back and reached for his handcuffs. Judge Williams calmly asked what crime she was being arrested for. Officer Thompson's reply would later become a crucial piece of evidence in the federal lawsuit that followed. He claimed she was under arrest for vehicle theft and resisting arrest, despite the fact that she had been cooperative the entire time. As he locked the handcuffs around her wrists, Judge Williams clearly stated her name, identified herself as a federal judge, and asked him to verify her identity before continuing any further. Officer Thompson either did not hear her or chose to ignore her completely. He guided her toward the back of his patrol car as she continued calmly, explaining who she was and requesting that he check her credentials. Her briefcase, packed with court papers that could have confirmed who she was in seconds, lay on the ground beside her Mercedes. Her official judge ID was inside her purse, which was still sitting on the front seat of her car. Once she was placed in the back of the patrol vehicle, Judge Williams stayed remarkably calm. Throughout her career, she had worked closely with law enforcement officers, the good ones and the bad ones. She understood the system better than most people and could clearly see that this situation was falling apart because of assumptions and prejudice, not facts. What she didn't know at the time was that several neighbors had seen everything and were already taking action. Mrs. Eleanor Davis, who lived directly across the street, had been watering her garden when she noticed the police cruiser pull in behind Judge Williams' Mercedes. She watched the entire encounter and immediately felt that something was deeply wrong. Having lived in the neighborhood for more than 20 years, she knew exactly who Judge Williams was and what she did for a living. Mrs. Davis quickly called her husband, a retired attorney, and explained what she was witnessing. He told her to start recording everything and to contact the police department right away to report what looked like a serious case of mistaken identity. By the time she pulled out her phone to begin recording, Judge Williams was already seated in the back of the patrol car. Another neighbor, James Mitchell, was out walking his dog when he noticed the growing disturbance. He recognized Judge Williams immediately, since his own brother had appeared in her courtroom 2 years earlier for a civil case. Carefully approaching the scene, he tried to explain to Officer Thompson that he had made a mistake. He told him that the woman he had detained was a federal judge who lived in that very house. Officer Thompson ordered Mr. Mitchell to step back and mind his own business. He insisted he was responding to a stolen vehicle report and claimed he was following proper police procedures. When Mr. Mitchell continued, saying he personally knew the woman in the patrol car was Judge Williams, Thompson threatened to arrest him for interfering with a police investigation. Quick question for you watching: have you ever seen something like this happen in your own community? If you have, type yes in the comments. Things were about to get much worse before they got better. Officer Thompson radioed for backup, telling dispatch that he had arrested a vehicle theft suspect who was pretending to be a federal judge. His voice made it clear he believed this was some kind of elaborate lie. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, their red and blue lights flashing and turning the quiet street into a public spectacle. More neighbors came outside, drawn by the noise and confusion. By now, Judge Williams had been sitting in the back of the patrol car for nearly 20 minutes, the handcuffs pressed painfully into her wrists, and she could feel the eyes of her neighbors on her as the humiliating scene unfolded. She had overseen many cases involving police misconduct, but experiencing it firsthand felt completely different. The helplessness she felt in that moment stayed with her long afterward. The backup officers seemed unsure why they had been called. Officer Sarah Martinez, a 12-year veteran of the force, immediately sensed that something was off. She approached Officer Thompson and asked him to explain what had happened. His explanation was scattered and didn't fully make sense. He mentioned a stolen black Mercedes but avoided giving clear details when Martinez asked questions. Officer Martinez then walked over to the patrol car, holding Judge Williams. Looking through the window, she saw a well-dressed, professional woman who clearly didn't fit the picture of a car thief. Judge Williams looked straight at her and calmly stated her name and her role as a federal judge. This time, someone was listening. Officer Martinez returned to Thompson and told him they needed to verify the woman's identity before moving forward. She warned him that if the woman truly was a federal judge, they were heading straight into a legal disaster that could end careers. but Thompson refused to back down. He insisted the woman was lying and claimed that criminals often create detailed stories to escape arrest. He said he needed to take her to the station for proper processing. That was when Mrs. Davis stepped forward, phone in hand. She had been recording from her yard and now approached Officer Martinez. She introduced herself as Judge Williams' neighbor and clearly stated that the woman sitting in the patrol car was Judge Patricia Williams. She pointed to the white colonial house behind them and explained that the judge lived there. Mrs. Davis offered to show her the recordings and provided names of other neighbors who could confirm the judge's identity. Officer Martinez immediately understood how serious the situation had become. She radioed dispatch and asked them to run a check on Patricia Williams to confirm her identity and position. Just minutes later, dispatch confirmed it was true. Patricia Williams was a sitting federal judge. The dispatcher's voice carried urgency, and Officer Martinez could hear the concern in the way the message was delivered. Thompson's reaction only made the situation worse. Instead of apologizing and releasing Judge Williams right away, he became defensive. He claimed she should have identified herself properly from the very beginning. He said her behavior seemed suspicious and insisted that he had followed police protocol. Officer Martinez knew that wasn't true. She was aware that the dashboard camera had been recording the entire encounter, and she understood that Thompson's version of events would fall apart once the footage was reviewed. After being detained for 35 minutes, Judge Williams was finally released from the patrol car. When the handcuffs were removed, she gently rubbed her wrists, where the metal had left red marks. She remained calm, but anyone who knew her well could see the controlled anger in her eyes. She thanked Officer Martinez for her professionalism and then asked for the names and badge numbers of every officer involved. Then Thompson made one final mistake, one that would later cost him greatly. As Judge Williams gathered her belongings and prepared to walk into her house, he approached her and suggested they could forget the entire incident if she was willing to let it go. He hinted that filing a complaint wasn't necessary and said situations like this happened all the time. Judge Williams looked at him with the same cold, steady expression she used when addressing the most serious offenders in her courtroom. She told him clearly that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a serious violation of her constitutional rights. She explained that behavior like his was exactly what destroyed public trust in law enforcement, and she made it clear she would use every legal option available to her. By this time, neighbors who had witnessed everything began stepping closer. They offered their support and shared their contact information so they could serve as witnesses if needed. Mrs. Davis handed Judge Williams the video she had recorded. Mr. Mitchell gave her a written statement describing what he saw. Even neighbors who had never spoken to her before came forward, shocked and angry that something like this could happen on their street. Officer Thompson left that day believing he had made a mistake that would fade away in a few days. He had no idea he had just set off a legal chain of events that would uncover years of misconduct and cost his department nearly $1 million. His own patrol car's dash camera had recorded everything, including the moment. He refused to listen, even as multiple people tried to correct him. That evening, Judge Williams called her family and closest friends and told them what had happened. Her daughter, a first-year law student at the time, was so upset that she wanted to drive home immediately. Her husband, a physician, was furious and wanted to file complaints with every agency he could think of. But Judge Williams understood something important. Rushing into legal action without careful planning would be a mistake. Instead, she did what she had trained herself to do throughout her career. She began gathering proof. She collected evidence, reviewed the laws that applied, and met with attorneys who specialized in civil rights cases. She also wrote down every detail of the incident while it was still fresh in her memory. She knew that if she was going to fight for justice, she had to do it the right way, carefully, clearly, and supported by strong facts. The next morning, Judge Williams called in sick to court for the first time in more than 3 years. Rather than going to work, she spent the entire day meeting with lawyers and civil rights organizations. Soon, word of what had happened spread quickly through the legal community. Federal judges are expected to receive a certain level of respect and protection because they help uphold the Constitution. So when a federal judge is treated with the same discrimination she has spent her career trying to stop, It sends shockwaves through the entire system. Officer Thompson showed up to work the following day as if nothing had happened. He wrote an incident report describing the situation as a routine traffic stop that ended in a simple case of mistaken identity. He left out several critical details. He failed to mention that he ignored repeated attempts by Judge Williams and by witnesses to explain who she was. He also didn't include the fact that he kept a federal judge in handcuffs for over half an hour, based solely on racial profiling. His supervisor, Sergeant David Morrison, reviewed the report and immediately sensed that something was wrong. With over 20 years in law enforcement, Morrison could tell when a report had been deliberately cleaned up. The story didn't add up. Why would someone steal a car and then drive it directly into the driveway of the home they supposedly lived in? Why would a car thief remain calm, offer identification, and claimed to be a federal judge? And most importantly, why hadn't Thompson confirmed the stolen vehicle report before making an arrest? Morrison pulled the dashboard camera footage and watched the entire incident. What he saw made his stomach sink. He could clearly see Judge Williams remaining calm and respectful throughout the encounter. He heard her repeatedly state her name and explain who she was. He saw neighbors step forward to confirm her identity. And worst of all, he watched Thompson become more dismissive and aggressive each time someone tried to correct his obvious mistake. By Thursday morning, Morrison was sitting in Chief Rebecca Walsh's office, playing the video on his laptop. Chief Walsh had led the department for 6 years and had worked hard to rebuild trust with the community and reduce complaints about officer behavior. But as she watched the footage, she realized that all of that progress could be undone by one officer's terrible judgment and refusal to listen. The department's legal counsel was brought in immediately. Attorney Michael Rodriguez watched the dash cam video and quickly told Chief Walsh that they were facing a possible federal civil rights lawsuit, one that could cost the department a massive amount of money. He explained that detaining a federal judge because of racial profiling wasn't just a public image problem. It was a serious violation of the Constitution at the highest level. At the same time, Judge Williams hired well-known civil rights attorney David Chen. His law firm had already won several major cases against police departments across the country. After reviewing the evidence Judge Williams had gathered, Chen told her she had one of the strongest cases he had ever seen. He explained that the dash cam footage alone clearly pointed to racial profiling, but when combined with Thompson's personnel records and witness statements, it showed something much deeper: years of misconduct that had gone unchecked and unpunished. Chen filed the federal lawsuit on Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the incident. The lawsuit stated that Judge Williams' 4th and 14th Amendment rights had been violated. It said she was unlawfully detained and treated like a criminal solely because of her race. The lawsuit named Officer Thompson, Sergeant Morrison, for failing to properly supervise, and the police department itself for allowing policies that made racial profiling possible. As soon as the lawsuit was filed, it became major news. In that community, the idea of a federal judge suing her own police department was something no one had ever seen before. Legal experts interviewed by the media largely agreed that Judge Williams had a very strong case. Professor Linda Martinez from the local law school told reporters that the dash cam footage appeared to be a clear, textbook example of racial profiling. Officer Thompson was placed on administrative leave while both the internal investigation and the federal lawsuit moved forward. For the first time, the seriousness of the situation finally hit him. He hired his own lawyer, and after reviewing the evidence, the attorney gave him some difficult news. Thompson was likely going to lose his job, could face criminal charges for violating Judge Williams' civil rights, and might even be held personally responsible for paying damages. The internal affairs investigation wrapped up within 2 weeks. Captain Lisa Rodriguez led the investigation and concluded that Thompson had violated multiple department rules. These included policies on traffic stops, use of force, and professional conduct. Her report explained that Thompson never verified the stolen vehicle report, ignored several people who tried to correct him, and showed a repeated pattern of targeting black drivers' actions that violated both department policy and federal law. Thompson's personnel file revealed a disturbing history that had somehow avoided serious consequences. During his 8 years on the force, 14 citizen complaints had been filed against him, and 12 involved allegations of racial bias or excessive force. Most of those complaints were dismissed with little investigation or handled with weak discipline, such as extra training or written warnings. The pattern was undeniable. Thompson stopped black drivers nearly 4 times more often than white drivers, even though he worked in a district that was mostly white. And when he searched black drivers, he found illegal items at the same rate as when he searched white drivers. This showed that his focus on black motorists wasn't based on crime. It was based on bias. Captain Rodriguez's findings also exposed failures by Thompson's supervisors. They either failed to notice the pattern or chose not to address it. His yearly performance reviews often rated him as satisfactory or even above average, with little mention of the complaints or the racial disparities in his traffic stops. Even the department's early warning system, which was designed to flag officers with repeated issues, somehow failed to identify Thompson as a serious risk. Chief Rebecca Walsh made the decision to fire Thompson before the internal investigation was even officially completed. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and she knew keeping him employed would only create more legal problems for the department. Thompson was terminated on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after he arrested Judge Williams in her own driveway. His firing made front-page news, and the story quickly spread beyond the local area. Civil rights organizations praised Judge Williams for taking legal action. They pointed out that many victims of police misconduct don't have the financial resources, legal knowledge, or support system needed to fight back. The NAACP released a statement saying the case showed how racial profiling can affect anyone, even someone at the highest level of the legal system. Legal experts also began discussing the case as a potential landmark civil rights example. Professor James Washington from Howard University Law School explained to reporters that federal judges hold a unique role in the justice system, and when their civil rights are violated, it raises even greater constitutional concerns. He predicted the case could lead to significant financial damages and possibly influence how courts handle racial profiling cases in the future. As the lawsuit moved into the discovery phase, even more damaging information came to light. Attorney David Chen's team subpoenaed 5 years of traffic stop data, citizen complaints, and officer training records. What they found revealed a department that had repeatedly failed to address racial bias among its officers. The data showed that black drivers were stopped at much higher rates than their share of the local population. They were also more likely to be searched, arrested, and have force used against them during police encounters. Despite these clear patterns, department leadership had taken little meaningful action to fix the problem. The lawsuit also revealed that Thompson was not the only officer with concerning behavior. 3 other officers showed similar patterns of racially biased enforcement. Like Thompson, they faced minimal discipline even after multiple citizen complaints. Training records made the situation look even worse. Officers received only basic instruction on constitutional rights and racial bias with no serious ongoing education, no strong accountability measures, and no real system designed to create change. Judge Williams now found herself in a rare and powerful position. She was both a victim of police misconduct and someone who deeply understood the legal system meant to prevent it. She began speaking publicly about police reform, giving interviews to national news outlets, and sharing her experience. She made one point very clear: if a federal judge could be treated this way, then everyday citizens were at even greater risk. Her case soon caught the attention of federal officials in Washington. The Department of Justice announced it was closely monitoring the situation and considered whether to open a broader investigation into the department's practices. Civil rights groups pushed for a consent decree which would place the police department under federal oversight until real and lasting reforms were made. With non-stop media coverage, pressure on city leaders quickly became overwhelming. Mayor Jennifer Thompson, who was not related to the fired officer, announced a full review of police policies and promised major reforms. She created a civilian oversight board and committed to giving every officer mandatory implicit bias training. Critics were quick to point out that these changes should have been made years earlier. As the case moved closer to trial, serious settlement discussions began. The city's insurance company which would be responsible for paying any final judgment, strongly pushed to settle the case as soon as possible and keep it out of the public eye. They knew a trial would bring weeks of negative publicity and risk an even larger payout from a jury likely to sympathize with Judge Williams. Judge Williams now faced a difficult decision. She had to choose between accepting a settlement or taking the case all the way to trial. Her attorneys explained that a trial could result in a much higher financial award and force stronger long-term reforms. But it would also mean months of continued legal battles and constant public attention on one of the most painful moments of her life. As talks continued, the true cost of Officer Thompson's actions that Tuesday afternoon became clear. The city first offered $250,000, but that offer was immediately rejected as far too low. Attorney David Chen responded with a $2 million demand, pointing to the seriousness of the constitutional violations and the need to send a strong message about accountability. Negotiations dragged on for weeks. Both sides understood the case was about far more than money. Judge Williams wanted solid guarantees that real reforms would be enforced, so this kind of abuse would never happen again. The city, meanwhile, was desperate to avoid a public trial that would expose years of weak supervision and discriminatory practices inside the department. Legal experts across the country closely followed the case, calling it a possible turning point in how courts handle racial profiling. With clear dashcam footage, a highly respected victim, and strong proof of systemic problem, many believed the case had all the signs of becoming a landmark civil rights decision. Local activists began organizing rallies in support of Judge Williams. Hundreds of community members attended, many sharing their own painful stories of biased and unfair policing. These gatherings showed just how widespread the problem was and placed even more pressure on city leaders to take responsibility and make real, lasting changes. At the same time, Thompson's life was unraveling. He was now unemployable in law enforcement. No police department would hire an officer fired for racially profiling a federal judge. Finding work in any field became difficult because his termination had been widely reported. His family also suffered, facing threats and harassment, and eventually they were forced to move to another state just to escape the constant attention. The impact of that 35-minute detention continued spreading through the community. Other victims of Thompson's behavior began coming forward, some describing incidents that had happened years earlier. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of dozens of drivers who said they were illegally stopped and searched by Thompson solely because of their race. The police department's reputation suffered serious damage. Recruiting new officers became difficult, as qualified candidates did want to join a department linked to racial profiling scandals. Trust between police and the community, something that had taken years to build, collapsed almost overnight. Local business leaders also grew concerned, fearing the city's damaged image would hurt economic growth and future investment. As settlement talks intensified, both sides prepared for the possibility that negotiations could fail and the case would go to trial. Judge Williams remained firm in her resolve. She had spent her entire career defending the Constitution, and she was not going to back down when her own rights had been so clearly violated. After 18 months of legal battles, the jury reached a verdict in just 4 hours. The decision awarded $910,000 in damages and required mandatory police reforms that would completely reshape the department. Officer Thompson lost everything: his career, his pension, and his reputation. Judge Williams chose to use the settlement money to create a foundation that supports victims of police misconduct. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it finally does, it has the power to change everything. This case was painful and intense, but what happened next would be even more shocking.